A meeting that lasted 7 minutes ended my 9 years of spotless contribution. But in the silver USB drive I left on that conference table was Clause 9. And Clause 9 doesn't forgive. When they fired me to cut costs, they didn't know they'd just deleted the last link holding $33 million in federal funding. But I knew, and I waited. My name is Rebecca Cole, and at 43, I'd spent nearly a decade making sure Norbridge Analytics never missed a federal deadline. Budget Coordination Director, a title that sounded boring at cocktail parties, but meant I held the keys to millions in government contracts. Until that Tuesday morning when everything changed. The email came at 8:47 a.m. Mandatory meeting with VP Sterling, conference room B, 9 a.m. sharp, no subject line, no context, just those cold corporate words that made my coffee taste like ash. I knew Kendra Sterling by reputation only. 28 years old, fresh MBA from some online program nobody had heard of, and more importantly, the CEO's niece. She'd been hired 3 weeks ago as Vice President of Strategic Innovation, whatever that meant. The whispers in the break room said she was here to shake things up. I should have paid more attention to those whispers. Conference room B smelled like new leather and ambition. Kendra sat at the head of the table, her platinum blonde hair pulled into a severe bun that made her look even younger. She didn't look up from her tablet when I entered. "Rebecca, sit." Not good morning, not thank you for coming, just 2 words, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never had to earn their authority. I sat. The chair creaked, the only sound in a room that suddenly felt too small. "I'll make this quick," she said, finally meeting my eyes. Hers were the pale blue of winter ice. "As part of our operational restructuring, we're eliminating redundancies in middle management. Your position is being dissolved effective immediately." The words hit like physical blows, but I kept my face neutral. 9 years. 9 years of 60-hour weeks, of catching errors that would have cost us federal certification, of building the systems that kept $33 million flowing through our doors, reduced to redundancy. "I see," I said, my voice steadier than my hands. "Who's taking over the federal compliance protocols?" She waved a manicured hand dismissively. "We're bringing in fresh talent, digital natives who understand modern workflows." Digital natives, I almost laughed, as if federal budget compliance was about knowing how to use TikTok. "The Clause 9 designation," I pressed. "Who's going to—" "HR will handle your exit paperwork," she interrupted, sliding a manila folder across the table. "Security will escort you out in 15 minutes. Please leave your keycard and any company property on your desk." That's when I asked the question that would destroy them. "Kendra, do you know what Clause 9 actually is?" She smiled then, a thin slash of coral lipstick. "I don't need to know every little detail. Rebecca, that's why we're modernizing. Too many people here think they're irreplaceable because they've memorized some obscure regulations. 7 minutes, that's all it took. 7 minutes to end 9 years of spotless service." She stood, smoothing her designer skirt, already dismissing me from her mind. "Oh," she added, hand on the door handle. "The CEO wanted me to thank you for your years of service, but honestly, we should have done this restructuring years ago. Could have saved a fortune." The door clicked shut behind her. I sat alone in conference room B, staring at the manila folder I hadn't touched. Through the glass walls, I could see my colleagues pretending not to watch, their eyes darting away when I looked up. The corporate theater of public execution. But Kendra Sterling had made a fatal error. Several, actually. She didn't know what Clause 9 was. She didn't know that my name, Rebecca Cole, was legally bound to Norbridge's federal certification. And she certainly didn't know that I'd seen this coming 3 weeks ago, the moment her hiring was announced. I opened my laptop one last time, my fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced precision. A few clicks, a digital signature withdrawn, a certification status updated in the Federal Budget Office system, all perfectly legal, all within my rights as the designated qualified auditor of record. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a silver USB drive. Everything they'd need to understand what was about to happen. Every email, every certification, every system log that proved I was the only person legally authorized to approve federal fund transfers for Norbridge Analytics. I left it on the conference table, right where Kendra had been sitting. A small gift. They'd find it eventually. Probably when the first federal payment bounced, when the panic set in, when they realized that redundancy had been their word, not mine. Security arrived exactly 15 minutes later, a kind-faced man named Tom, who'd always held the door for me. "I'm sorry about this, Ms. Cole," he murmured, as we walked to my desk. "Don't be, Tom," I said, packing my personal items with deliberate calm. "Some lessons are expensive. Norbridge is about to learn just how expensive." I left the building at 9:32 a.m., cardboard box in hand, head held high. Behind me, Norbridge Analytics hummed with the ordinary chaos of a Tuesday morning. They had no idea their foundation had just been removed. But they would, and I had all the time in the world to watch it crumble. The first thing I did when I got home was pour myself a glass of wine. The second was open my laptop and pull up the Federal Budget Office regulations. Not because I needed to read them, I could recite Clause 9 in my sleep, but because I wanted to see the words again, to taste them. Section 9.3.2. Any organization handling Category 7 federal budget analysis must maintain a designated qualified auditor of record. This individual must be named, certified, and personally authenticated in the FBO system. Loss of designated auditor status results in immediate suspension of all federal transaction privileges until a qualified replacement is certified, a process requiring minimum 90 days and full historical audit compliance. 90 days, 3 months of frozen payments, 3 months of failed transfers, 3 months of pure systematic hell. I took another sip of wine and opened my secure laptop. The one Norbridge didn't know about. My fingers found the encrypted folders automatically: 8 years of access logs, user authentications, budget approval histories, every digital signature, every timestamp, every proof that Rebecca Cole had been the beating heart of Norbridge's federal operations. They'd called me redundant. They had no idea they'd just fired their entire circulatory system. The USB drive I'd left behind contained something else, a simplified version of these files, formatted for executive understanding. When they finally opened it, when desperation drove them to look at what the redundant director had left behind, they'd see exactly how deep the knife went. But first, they had to bleed a little. First, they had to understand that some knowledge can't be Googled, some systems can't be disrupted, and some people aren't replaceable by fresh-faced graduates with Instagram-perfect resumes. I closed the laptop and looked around my home office. 9 years of commuting downtown, 9 years of conference calls at 6 a.m. to accommodate East Coast federal offices, 9 years of being the only person who understood that Norbridge wasn't a tech company playing with government money, it was a government contractor pretending to be a tech company. That distinction mattered. Clause 9 made sure it mattered. My phone buzzed. A text from Maya Patel, one of the senior analysts. "OMG, Rebecca. What happened? Kendra's already posted your job on LinkedIn. Says she wants someone who gets the startup mindset." I didn't reply. Let them think I was devastated, crawling into bed with a pint of ice cream and self-pity. The truth was simpler and colder. I was already gone. Not just from the building, but from their entire system. My name erased from every federal authentication protocol. My certifications withdrawn. My access revoked. All perfectly legal, all completely within my rights. The beautiful thing about Clause 9 was its absoluteness. You couldn't fake it, work around it, or innovate your way past it. The federal government didn't care about your startup mindset or your digital transformation. They cared about one thing: is your qualified auditor of record certified and active in the system? As of 9:48 a.m. this morning, Norbridge's answer was no. I spent the rest of the day organizing my files, backing up my personal records, and preparing for what came next. Because this wasn't just about revenge, though I'd be lying if I said that wasn't part of it. This was about value, real value, the kind that doesn't show up in PowerPoint presentations or get discussed in innovation workshops. By 5 p.m., I'd accomplished more than Kendra Sterling would understand in a lifetime. I'd removed my name from every federal database where it appeared as Norbridge's representative. I'd withdrawn my personal liability coverage from their corporate insurance. I'd even sent a formal notification to the Federal Budget Office that I was no longer employed by Norbridge Analytics, effective immediately. That last one was the kill shot, a simple email, seed to no one, filed in triplicate with the appropriate federal offices. Please be advised that Rebecca Cole is no longer authorized to act as qualified auditor of record for Norbridge Analytics as of today's date. All associated certifications and clearances should be updated accordingly. Bureaucracy at its finest. A single email that would take days to process, weeks to fully propagate through the system, and months to undo. By the time anyone at Norbridge realized what had happened, their federal payments would be frozen, their contracts suspended, and their $33 million portfolio locked behind a wall of red tape so thick, not even the CEO's connections could cut through it. I poured another glass of wine and sat on my deck, watching the sun set over the city. Somewhere out there, Norbridge was still humming along, blissfully unaware. Kendra was probably posting motivational quotes on the company Slack. The CEO was likely on a golf course, confident his niece was trimming the fat, cutting costs, making the company lean and agile. They thought they'd fired a middle manager. They'd actually fired their oxygen supply. The phone rang. I didn't answer. It would be HR, probably, with some last-minute paperwork, or maybe a tea. Realizing they couldn't access certain federal databases, the first domino starting to wobble. I smiled, raised my glass to the setting sun, and made a toast to Clause 9, and to everyone who thinks the details don't matter. The best part, I hadn't done anything wrong. I'd simply stopped doing something right. Sometimes, that's all it takes to bring down an empire. Tomorrow, I'd start looking for a new job. Something quieter, maybe. Something where they understood that boring, middle-aged women who knew the rules were worth their weight in gold. But tonight I'd watch the first cracks appear in Norbridge's perfect facade, and I'd sleep better than I had in years. 3 weeks passed before the first real sign of trouble surfaced. I'd been monitoring Norbridge's social media not obsessively, just enough to watch Kendra Sterling's transformation of my former department. She'd renamed it Strategic Finance, and filled it with 20-somethings who thought pivot tables were revolutionary. Thrilled to announce our new strategic finance team, her LinkedIn post gushed, bringing fresh perspectives and agile methodologies to government contracting at disruption at next-gen/startup mindset. The comments were a mix of empty congratulations and tech bro buzzwords. I scrolled past the heart reactions and rainbow emojis, noting the names of my replacements. Not one had federal contracting experience. Not one understood the difference between commercial and government accounting standards. They were children playing with a loaded weapon, and Kendra had handed them the ammunition. Then I saw it buried in a company blog post about their digital transformation journey, a single line that made me sit up straighter. Minor delays in Q3 federal reporting as we transition to our new cloud-based systems. Minor delays, I almost laughed. In federal contracting, there were no minor delays. There were only compliance failures waiting to metastasize. My phone rang. Maya Patel's name flashed on the screen. This time, I answered. "Rebecca, thank God," she breathed. "I didn't think you'd pick up. Listen, I shouldn't be calling, but something's wrong with the federal systems. They keep rejecting our authentication tokens." "That's unfortunate," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "The new kids don't know what to do. They've been Googling error codes for 3 days. Kendra told them to innovate a solution. Rebecca, we can't even log into the FBO portal." I made sympathetic noises while filing my nails. The FBO portal required Level 7 authentication, something that came with the Qualified Auditor designation. Without it, Norbridge might as well try to access Fort Knox with a library card. "Can't they call federal support?" I suggested innocently. Maya's laugh was bitter. "They tried. Support asked for our auditor of record. When they said you'd been terminated, the support tech just said, 'I see,' and hung up." Of course they did. Federal support didn't explain security protocols to unauthorized personnel. They certainly didn't help companies who'd lost their certification through their own stupidity. "I'm sure Kendra will figure it out," I said. "She seems very innovative." "Rebecca, please, we have $17 million in payments due next week. If we can't process them—" "Maya," I interrupted gently, "I don't work there anymore. Remember, I was redundant." The silence stretched between us. "Finally," Maya whispered, "they don't even know what Clause 9 is. I mentioned it in the crisis meeting yesterday, and Kendra asked if it was a new software update." I ended the call after a few more platitudes. Maya was a good analyst, but she'd stayed silent when I was marched out. Corporate loyalty only extended as far as the next paycheck. The following Monday, I spotted the first public crack in Norbridge's facade, a small item in Federal Contracts Weekly. Norbridge Analytics misses payment certification deadline. Just 2 sentences. Easy to overlook if you didn't know what it meant. I knew. Missing 1 deadline triggered an automatic review. Missing 2 triggered a compliance audit. Missing 3. That triggered Clause 9. My laptop dinged with a Google alert. Kendra Sterling had posted another LinkedIn update. Exciting times at Norbridge. Reimagining how we interface with government partners. Sometimes you have to break things to rebuild them better. Move deadlines. Break barriers. Move deadlines. Break barriers. She had no idea she was documenting her own incompetence in real time. I opened my secure files and reviewed the timeline I'd mapped out weeks ago. Based on federal processing speeds and Norbridge's payment cycles, they had approximately 10 days before the first major contract cancellation, 2 weeks before the audit notices arrived, 3 weeks before someone, somewhere, finally opened that USB drive I'd left behind and understood the magnitude of their mistake. But by then, it would be too late. Clause 9 didn't have a pause button. Once triggered, it required full recertification, new auditor appointment, complete historical review, and 90 days minimum processing. During that time, all federal payments would be frozen, all contracts suspended, all revenue stopped. $33 million, hanging by a thread I'd carefully, legally, precisely cut. My doorbell rang. A delivery driver stood outside with an enormous bouquet of flowers. The card read, "From your friends at Trayon Systems, we heard you might be available. Coffee next week, William Chen, CEO." Trayon Systems, Norbridge's biggest competitor. Word traveled fast in the federal contracting world. They smelled blood in the water, and they knew exactly who'd opened the vein. I put the flowers in water and sent a polite reply. Yes, I'd be happy to meet for coffee. Yes, I was exploring new opportunities. Yes, I had extensive experience with federal compliance protocols. What I didn't say was that I'd already pulled the pin on the grenade. Norbridge just hadn't heard the explosion yet. That night, I updated my resume for the first time in 9 years. Under achievements, I was tempted to write, "Saved company from $33 million catastrophic failure for 9 consecutive years." Instead, I wrote, "Maintained 100% federal compliance rate across all major contracts." Same thing, really. They just hadn't realized it until I stopped. The call came on a Thursday at 2:17 p.m. Unknown number. But the 202 area code told me everything. Washington, D.C., Federal Territory. Ms. Cole. The voice was male, professionally neutral. "This is David Winters from the Federal Budget Office. I'm calling regarding Norbridge Analytics Qualified Auditor of Record Status." I muted the TV and settled into my couch. "I'm no longer employed by Norbridge. Mr. Winters, you should speak with their HR department." "Yes, we're aware. That's why I'm calling." A pause. Paper shuffling. "Our records show you withdrew your certification 3 weeks ago. Is that correct?" "That's correct. My employment was terminated, so I withdrew my personal certification. Standard procedure." "I see." His tone suggested he saw quite a lot. "And has Norbridge submitted a replacement auditor designation?" "I wouldn't know. As I said, I no longer work there." "Ms. Cole, I'm going to be direct. Norbridge Analytics currently has $17.3 million in pending federal payments. Without a qualified auditor of record, those payments cannot be processed. Are you certain they're aware of this situation?" I chose my words carefully. During my exit meeting, I asked the terminating executive about Clause 9 compliance. She indicated it wasn't a priority. The silence stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Finally, she said it wasn't a priority. Her exact words were that she didn't need to know every little detail. "I see. And this executive's name?" "Kendra Sterling, Vice President of Strategic Innovation." More shuffling, the rapid click of keyboard keys. "There's no Kendra Sterling listed in our authorized contact database." Of course there wasn't. She'd been too busy disrupting and innovating to complete basic federal registration. "Mr. Winters, I've been happy to clarify my status, but I really can't speak for Norbridge anymore. One more question. Ms. Cole, in your professional opinion, how long would it take Norbridge to restore compliance? The question hung between us. He knew the answer, I knew the answer, but he needed to hear it. Assuming they started today 90 days minimum for new auditor certification, plus time to reconstruct any missing documentation from the transition period, plus remediation for any compliance failures that occurred during the gap. I paused. Realistically, 4 to 6 months. And their federal contracts would be suspended pending compliance restoration. All $33 million worth. So he knew the exact number. Of course he did. David Winters hadn't called to gather information. He'd called to confirm what he already suspected, that Norbridge had accidentally driven off a cliff and didn't know it yet. That's correct, I said. Thank you for your time, Ms. Cole. One last thing, are you available for consulting work? The FBO occasionally needs experienced auditors to help companies navigate compliance restoration. I almost smiled. I'm exploring opportunities, but I haven't committed to anything yet. Good to know. Have a pleasant afternoon. The call ended at 2:26 p.m., 9 minutes that sealed Norbridge's fate. Within an hour, my phone exploded with notifications, text messages, missed calls, voicemails, emails, a digital panic attack from my former employer. I ignored them all until one name appeared: Robert Chen, CEO of Norbridge Analytics. No, wait, I checked again. Robert Clark, not Chen, my mistake. His voicemail was barely controlled chaos. Rebecca, this is Bob Clark. We need to talk immediately about this FBO situation. There's been a misunderstanding. Call me back at this number as soon as possible. A misunderstanding. As if Clause 9 was a typo that could be corrected with enough executive pressure. I deleted the voicemail and went back to my afternoon wine. They'd figure it out eventually, or they wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't my problem anymore. By 6 p.m., the calls had escalated. The CFO, the general counsel, even Tom from security, asking on someone's behalf if I still had any company documentation. That last one made me laugh. Did I have documentation? I had everything. Legally retained personal copies of every critical process I'd built, every system I'd designed, every federal requirement I'd navigated. 9 years of institutional knowledge, backed up and encrypted, sitting in my home office. But they hadn't asked about that during my 7-minute termination, had they? Maya texted at 8:43 p.m. Emergency board meeting tomorrow. Kendra's been crying in the bathroom for an hour. Federal payments all rejected. What do we do? I texted back, I suggest you update your resume. It was petty. It was beneath me. It felt fantastic. That night, I opened my laptop and did something I'd been avoiding. I looked at Norbridge's stock price, down 12% in after-hours trading. Word was already spreading. Federal contractors lived and died by their payment cycles. A company that couldn't process federal payments was a company circling the drain. Tomorrow, the board would meet. They'd panic. They'd point fingers. They'd probably fire Kendra. Though that wouldn't solve anything. They'd beg me to come back, offer me double, triple my salary. But they'd already shown me what I was worth to them. 7 minutes and a manila folder. Redundant. I poured another glass of wine and raised it to my reflection in the laptop screen. To David Winters, I said quietly, and to everyone at Norbridge who's about to learn what redundant really means. The federal government had made its position clear. Without Rebecca Cole, Norbridge Analytics didn't exist in their system. $33 million of contracts, suspended with a phone call I didn't even have to make. Sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do, it's what you stop doing. And I'd stopped being their safety net 3 weeks ago. By Monday morning, Clause 9 had done what I'd known it would. It had torn Norbridge Analytics apart from the inside. The first email arrived at 6:03 a.m. from their general counsel, marked urgent, legal matter. I didn't open it. The second came from the CFO at 6:15 a.m. Critical federal payment crisis, delete. By 7 a.m., I had 47 unread messages, each more desperate than the last. I made coffee and opened my laptop to the Federal Budget Office portal, not Norbridge's access, which was frozen, but the public compliance tracker, there it was, beautiful in its bureaucratic simplicity. Norbridge Analytics, Status: non-compliant contractor. Reason: no qualified auditor of record on file. Federal payment authorization suspended. Contract status under review. Compliance restoration timeline pending. Those 5 lines represented the complete shutdown of Norbridge's federal revenue stream. No payments in, no payments out, no access to bid on new contracts, no ability to modify existing ones. They were locked out of the system that generated 90% of their revenue. My phone rang. Robert Clark again. This time, I answered. "Rebecca, thank God," he breathed. His usual CEO polish was gone, replaced by raw panic. "We need you back, immediately, whatever salary you want." "I'm not interested, Bob." "You don't understand. The entire federal system is locked. 17 million in payments are frozen. The Pentagon is threatening to cancel our predictive analytics contract. The board is—" He stopped, composing himself. "What will it take?" "It's not about money." "Then what? A title, equity, a board seat, name it." I let the silence stretch before responding. "Bob, do you know why Kendra Sterling fired me?" "She said you were redundant. Part of the cost-cutting initiative." "Wrong. She fired me because she didn't understand what I did. None of you did. For 9 years, I was the only thing standing between Norbridge and federal compliance failure. And when your niece decided—" "She's not my niece," he interrupted. "She's my wife's niece, and she's no longer with the company as of this morning." So they'd thrown Kendra under the bus. Predictable. But firing the person who'd pulled the trigger didn't undo the damage. "It doesn't matter," I said. "Even if I wanted to help, which I don't, I can't. Once Clause 9 is triggered, there's no expedited restoration process. You need a new qualified auditor of record. That takes 90 days minimum. We found candidates, experienced federal auditors, but they all say they need access to historical documentation, systems that only you understood. Systems I built, processes I designed, knowledge I accumulated over 9 years, all of which you deemed redundant." His breathing was audible through the phone. "The USB drive you left, we opened it. It has some of our data, but it's like having a map with no legend. We can't make sense of it without you." The USB drive, my little gift, just enough information to show them what they'd lost, not enough to save them. "I'm sorry, Bob. I wish I could help." "The board has authorized a $10 million emergency fund to resolve this. $10 million, Rebecca, just to get us through the next quarter. $10 million, more than I'd make in a lifetime. But this wasn't about money anymore. It was about value, about being seen." "There is one option," I said slowly. "Anything. Tryon Systems has been courting me. They need a chief compliance officer. If I took that position, I'd have the authority to subcontract certain federal compliance validations. Theoretically, I could help Norbridge transition to a new auditor, for a fee." The silence was deafening. Tryon Systems, their biggest competitor, the company that had been trying to poach Norbridge's federal contracts for years. "You're going to work for Tryon." His voice was hollow. "I'm considering it. They seem to understand the value of experienced compliance professionals. This is corporate sabotage. We'll sue." "For what?" "Withdrawing my personal certification after being terminated, taking a job with another company. Everything I've done is perfectly legal. Bob, I learned from the best. Remember 9 years of watching Norbridge navigate federal regulations taught me exactly what I could and couldn't do." "Rebecca, please." "I have a meeting with Tryon's CEO tomorrow. I'll let them know Norbridge might be interested in compliance consulting services. Market rate, of course, plus a premium for expedited service." "You planned this. It wasn't a question." "No, Bob. You planned this when you let a 28-year-old with no federal experience fire your only qualified auditor. I just stopped catching your mistakes." I hung up before he could respond. 48 hours later, the news broke publicly. Norbridge Analytics stock plummets 40% on federal contract suspension. The financial press smelled blood. Analysts who'd praised their innovative restructuring 3 weeks ago now questioned their dangerous lack of compliance oversight. By Wednesday, 3 major federal agencies had issued suspension notices. By Thursday, Norbridge's primary credit line was frozen. Banks don't like lending to companies that can't collect revenue. By Friday, the board announced an emergency restructuring. And through it all, I sat in my home office, organizing 9 years of accumulated knowledge into a comprehensive federal compliance framework, not for Norbridge, for whoever understood its value. The FBO portal updated Friday afternoon. Norbridge Analytics. Multiple compliance failures detected. Estimated contract value at risk, $33.7 million. $33.7 million. They'd lost another $700,000 in penalties in just 5 days. I closed my laptop and prepared for my Monday meeting with Tryon Systems. They'd offered me everything Norbridge never had: respect, authority, and a compensation package that reflected my true value. But the money was just a number. The real payment was knowing that somewhere in Norbridge's gleaming offices, they were finally understanding what redundant actually cost. Saturday morning, 10:15 a.m. I was enjoying my coffee and weekend crossword when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a man in his 60s, silver-haired and wearing a golf polo. Isaac Brenner, Norbridge's former director who'd retired 6 months ago. "Isaac," I said, opening the door. "This is unexpected." His smile was tired but genuine. "Rebecca, may I come in? I promise I'm not here to beg." I led him to the living room, poured him coffee. Isaac had hired me 9 years ago, had understood my value when everyone else saw just another compliance officer. If anyone deserved courtesy, it was him. "I heard about the situation," he said, settling into my couch. "Bob Clark called me at 5 a.m. yesterday, practically hyperventilating, asked if I could come back, fix the federal certification mess. And," I laughed. He took a sip of coffee. "Told him I was retired, not stupid. Then I hung up and called you, but you didn't answer." "I've been screening calls." "Smart." He set down his cup, met my eyes. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something. When I retired, I recommended they promote you to my position. Told the board you were the only person who truly understood our federal obligations." This was news. They never mentioned that. Of course not. Bob's wife had other plans. Her niece needed a launching pad for her career. The board went along with it because, he shrugged, because they didn't understand what you did. To them, compliance was just paperwork, a box to check. And now the box is eating them alive. Isaac laughed, a sharp bark of amusement. $33 million worth. You know what the beautiful part is? They can't even blame you. Everything you did was by the book. You followed every exit protocol, every legal requirement. You just, he gestured vaguely, stopped being their guardian angel. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment before he continued. "I heard Tryon made you an offer. Chief Integrity Officer, full autonomy to build their federal compliance division." "Good. They're smart enough to know what they're getting." He paused. "Will you help Norbridge transition as a consultant?" I'd been thinking about this all week. The vindictive part of me wanted to watch them burn completely. But the professional part, the part Isaac had mentored, knew better. Standard consulting rates, triple fees for expedited service, and they sign a contract acknowledging that I have no liability for their current situation. More than fair. He stood to leave, then turned back. "You know what the irony is? That $33 million in federal contracts, it only exists because you built the systems to capture it. Before you arrived, Norbridge was lucky to handle $5 million in government work." "They never understood that," I said quietly. "No. They saw the golden eggs but never valued the goose." He shook his head. "Kendra Sterling posted on LinkedIn yesterday some nonsense about learning from setbacks and embracing failure as growth. She's already got a new job at some fintech startup." Of course she did. People like Kendra always landed on their feet. CV padded with their brief stint as VP. No mention of the destruction left behind. Meanwhile, people like me, the ones who actually kept the lights on, were redundant. After Isaac left, I returned to my laptop. The news was getting worse for Norbridge. A Reuters article speculated about bankruptcy. The stock had dropped another 15% in pre-market trading. 3 major competitors were circling, waiting to pick up the pieces. But there was something else, something that made me smile despite myself. A small item in the Federal Contracts Weekly, FBO announces new certification requirements for contractors. Buried in the bureaucratic language was a new provision: companies would now be required to maintain backup qualified auditors, and any termination of an auditor position would trigger an automatic 60-day review period. They were calling it the Norbridge Amendment in the industry forums. My legacy wasn't just the crater I'd left behind. It was the new rules that would prevent this from happening to another Rebecca Cole, another invisible guardian who kept the machine running. My phone buzzed. A text from my lawyer. Norbridge's general counsel reached out. They want to discuss a consulting arrangement. I told them your minimum terms. They agreed to everything. Want me to proceed? I thought about it. The money would be nice, probably 6 months of consulting fees that would equal 3 years of my old salary. But more importantly, it would be on my terms, my rules, my value, finally recognized. Set up a meeting for Monday afternoon, I replied, after my Treon meeting. Let them sweat through the weekend. Let them watch their stock price crater on Monday morning. Let them fully appreciate what they'd thrown away for the low price of 7 minutes of Kendra Sterling's time. I opened a new browser tab and looked at Treon's website. Their About Us page featured their leadership team. All people who'd worked their way up through the ranks. No nepotism hires, no startup mindset buzzwords. Just professionals who understood that in federal contracting, experience wasn't redundant, it was everything. Monday would be interesting. In the morning, I'd accept Treon's offer, becoming their newest executive with a mandate to build an unassailable compliance framework. In the afternoon, I'd sit across from Norbridge's desperate leadership and name my price for helping them dig out of their self-made grave. But today I finished my crossword, poured another cup of coffee, and savored the perfect irony of it all. They'd fired me to cut costs. Instead, they'd sabotaged themselves. And Clause 9 didn't offer bandages. The investigative audit began at 8 a.m. sharp on Tuesday. I watched from my kitchen table, laptop open to various news feeds, as federal vehicles pulled into Norbridge's parking lot. The Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, the Defense Contract Audit Agency, the Government Accountability Office. When you lose $33 million in federal contracts overnight, Uncle Sam doesn't just send a strongly worded letter. My phone had been silent since Sunday night. The desperate calls had stopped. They knew I wasn't their lifeline anymore. I was just another vendor now, waiting for contracts to be signed, terms to be negotiated. The panic had evolved into something colder: bureaucratic damage control. At 9:20 a.m., Maya Patel texted, "They're seizing servers," said something about forensic audit trail. Compliance team told to not touch computers. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. The audit would find exactly what I knew it would find: years of compliant operations followed by a sudden cliff. They'd trace every decision, every certification, every approval back to one name: Rebecca Cole. And then they'd find the void where that name used to be. The Bloomberg terminal updated at 10:45 a.m. Breaking: federal prosecutors join Norbridge Analytics audit team. Prosecutors? That was new. That meant they weren't just looking at compliance failures, they were looking for fraud, for intentional misrepresentation, for someone to blame. My lawyer called immediately. "Rebecca, given the escalation, I want to review your exit documentation again. Every email, every communication with Kendra Sterling." "It's all clean," I assured him. 7-minute meeting, standard termination, no severance dispute. I have the security footage timestamp and her email confirming the termination reason: operational restructuring. "And your withdrawal from the federal systems?" "Completely legal. Required. Actually, I couldn't maintain qualified auditor status for a company I no longer worked for. That would be misrepresentation." He exhaled slowly. "They're going to try to paint this as sabotage, corporate espionage, especially with you going to Treon." "Let them try. I followed every rule, every protocol. If they want to argue that following federal regulations constitutes sabotage, they're welcome to make that case to a judge." The news got worse throughout the day. CNBC ran a segment titled, "The $33 million Pink Slip." Fox Business had a panel discussing the dangers of nepotism in federal contracting. By market close, Norbridge stock had lost 61% of its value in under a month. At 4 p.m., an unexpected email arrived from the Federal Budget Office, CC'd to what looked like half the government. "RE Norbridge Analytics Compliance Investigation, Preliminary Findings." The investigation has revealed systematic failures in corporate governance, including termination of critical compliance personnel without succession planning, installation of unqualified individuals in federal-facing roles, failure to understand or maintain required certifications, no evidence of malicious action by former personnel. Primary responsibility appears to rest with executive decision-making post-termination of R. Cole, former qualified auditor of record. No evidence of malicious action. The federal government had just cleared me while damning Norbridge in the most bureaucratic language possible. My phone rang. Unknown number. But I recognized the voice immediately. David Winters from the FBO. Ms. Cole, I thought you'd want to know. The investigation is focusing on executive negligence, not individual actions. Your documentation has been exemplary. I appreciate the call. Mr. Winters? One more thing. That consulting position we discussed, the FBO would like to contract your services directly. Help other companies avoid similar situations. Interested. A federal consulting contract, the golden ticket in my industry. Very interested. Excellent. We'll send terms tomorrow. Oh, and Ms. Cole. That new position with Tryon, good choice. They've never had a Clause 9 violation. After we hung up, I sat back and processed what had just happened. Not only was I clear, but the federal government wanted to hire me to help prevent other companies from making Norbridge's mistakes. They wanted me to teach the very systems I'd spent 9 years perfecting, the ones Norbridge had deemed redundant. The final blow came at 5:17 p.m. via a Wall Street Journal push notification. Norbridge Board announces emergency CEO replacement, cites catastrophic governance failures in federal contract loss. Robert Clark was out. The man who'd let his wife's niece destroy his company for the sake of family harmony. The board had finally found their sacrificial lamb. But it wouldn't save them. You can't untrigger Clause 9 by changing CEOs. You can't restore federal trust with a press release. You can't replace 9 years of institutional knowledge with a LinkedIn job posting. That evening, I met Isaac Brenner for dinner at our old spot near the office. He raised his wine glass as I sat down. To vindication, he said simply. To understanding your value, I countered. We clinked glasses as the restaurant TV showed Norbridge's interim CEO making a desperate plea for patience from investors. Behind him, boxes of documents were being loaded into federal vehicles, evidence for an investigation that would likely take years to complete. You know what the saddest part is? Isaac said, watching the screen. This whole disaster, it started with them thinking they were too smart to need you, too innovative, too disruptive.